Residential sales comparison and income approaches, page 44. Opinion of highest and best use in a market value assignment and developing the particular valuation approach. In other words, once the appraiser forms conclusions of the subject property based on its physical, legal, and economic characteristics, he can go forward with identifying market data that can be used for his valuation analysis and how comparable the data is. As we concentrate our study of the sales comparison approach from this point through the next section, it should be made clear that many, if not most, of the same data research and analysis steps will be applicable when we discuss the income approach later in this text. As well, the assumption is being made as we move forward that the highest and best use of the subject property is as improved. Highest and best use is discussed and expanded upon in other courses dedicated to this topic. Data collection for comparable analysis. Ultimately, this portion of the analysis could result in being one of the most time-consuming aspects when developing the sales comparison approach, or as we will discuss later in this text, the income approach as well. But in some cases, this process can go rather smoothly depending on several variables. Most often, the quantity and quality of data available, the resources the appraiser has and utilizes, and the appraiser's experience in that particular market. As a general practice, the appraiser usually employs sold and closed transactions as comparable data when developing and supporting the conclusions reached in the sales comparison approach. However, it is common that the appraiser will also gather and analyze pending transactions and current listings. Some regulations and client requirements discussed in Chapter 7 restrict the inclusion of pending sales data in the sales comparison analysis to be limited to additional data over and above a specified number of closed transactions. For instance, as a fourth analyzed comparable. Current listings assist in illustrating the competition present in the market and usually suggest a top end that can be supported in the market and how the subject is positioned with the competition. To summarize, comparable data can represent sold properties, pending transactions, or active listings. To truly gain insight into the comparable analysis process, it is important to define the term comparable, concepts of comparable and competitive properties. One of the most potentially difficult steps for many appraisers in the sales comparison approach is choosing data for analysis that is, page 45, most comparable to the subject property. Generally, sold and closed transactions are used as comparable data. There may be times when the appraiser utilizes pending transactions and current listings as well. This process requires competency, which relies heavily on the appraiser's experience, judgment skills, and knowledge of the market and/or neighborhood. This leads us to a sometimes complex question. What is a comparable property? Comparable properties, or comparables, generically can, that's what it's spelled, it says generically, can be categorized as properties that share great or sometimes subtle similarities with the subject property. These similarities could be the location, design, or features. The similarity might also be the typical buyers for these properties, similar buyer mindset and profile. Comparability can be translated to a very broad or a narrowly defined basis. Therefore, it must be recognized that there are comparable properties, competitive properties, and properties that are both comparable and competitive. Comparable properties. Comparable properties possess many of the same appeal factors. The similarities may be physical in nature, or the property may have a similar locational appeal. However, the buyer for one property may not necessarily be interested in the comparable property. For example, a local builder has built two identical homes. One home is on the east side of the county, and the other home is on the west side of the county, nearly 30 miles apart. Let's go one step further and suppose that one of the properties is the subject of an appraisal assignment, and the other property sold 9 months ago. Is the sold property useful as a comparable for the subject? It probably is. If the buyer in the sale transaction purchased the property because of the home's design, features, quality, etc., there is nothing to say that this property would not be useful as a comparable. Obviously, locational differences as well as differences in market conditions would need to be addressed. We will discuss those later in this chapter. Another example of a comparable property could be a completely dissimilar house located in a very similar but far away area. Take recreational waterfront properties, for example. Here, the appeal is in the locational characteristics, the view, the water access, etc. The subject of an appraisal might be an A-frame design cottage, which is primarily used for recreational purposes. One comparable sale has been identified at another recreational lake in another market. The comparable sale is improved with a different ranch-style cottage. However, water frontage is nearly identical, as are the dock's rights and the dock itself. The two lakes are a similar distance from the comparable incorporated area. If the physical differences can be identified and equated to a dollar amount, as well as any differences between the two areas, they are probably comparable. A similar buyer action was represented. Purchase of a recreational property with similar locational amenities. Choosing data for analysis that is most comparable or comparable to the subject property can be challenging for appraisers in some assignments. Thus, the appraiser must possess competency in the market.